Ladies and gentlemen, life doesn't always make sense. You do your best, work hard, love deeply, and still things don't go the way you plan. It's in those moments when the unexpected happens, when disappointments mount, when you feel like you're doing everything right but still facing struggle after struggle, that you wonder, where is God in all of this? You're not alone. Everyone wrestles with this question at some point. The truth is, life on this earth is not fair. There are moments when people get what they don't deserve, both good and bad. You see it everywhere. Dishonest people seem to succeed, while honest, hardworking people struggle. The kindest people endure deep suffering, while those who are cruel seem untouched. And in those moments, the temptation is to believe that God is either unaware or indifferent to your pain. But that's not the truth. God sees everything. He knows every detail of your struggle, and He cares more than you can possibly imagine. The challenge is learning to trust Him even when nothing around you makes sense. Trusting God doesn't mean you ignore your pain or pretend everything is okay when it's not. It means you lean into Him even when you don't understand. It means you hold on to His promises even when circumstances tell you otherwise. Trust is built in the moments of uncertainty, in the valleys of life, not just on the mountaintops. One of the greatest obstacles to trust is the belief that God owes us an explanation. We think, if I could just understand why this is happening, then I could have peace. But God doesn't promise explanations. He promises His presence. He doesn't always give us the answers we want, but He gives us Himself, and that is enough. Think about the story of Joseph. Here was a young man who had a dream from God, a future filled with hope. But instead of stepping into that promise right away, he was betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and thrown into prison. For years, it looked like everything was going wrong. But in the end, God used every single trial to position Joseph exactly where he needed to be to save an entire nation and his own family. If Joseph had only trusted God when life was going well, he never would have made it through the dark times. But he believed that even in the worst moments, God was still in control. You may not see it now, but God is working in ways you can't even imagine. He is weaving together a bigger story, one that stretches far beyond what you can see in this moment. What seems unfair now may be the very thing that leads to the breakthrough you've been waiting for. Another challenge to trusting God is comparing your situation to others. You look around and see people who don't even seem to care about God living easier lives than you. It's frustrating, but comparison is a thief. It steals your joy, your peace, and your ability to see what God is doing in your own life. Instead of focusing on what others have, focus on what God is doing in you. Trust that His plan for you is unique and good, even when it doesn't look the way you expect it. One of the most powerful ways to build trust in God is through gratitude. It may seem counterintuitive, but thanking God in the middle of difficulty shifts your perspective. It reminds you that even in the midst of struggle, there is still good. There is still breath in your lungs. There are still people who love you. There are still blessings that you may have overlooked. Gratitude doesn't deny the pain, but it reminds you that pain is not the only reality. It also helps to remember that what feels like the end is never the end with God. You may be in the middle of your story, and it may look messy, but God has already seen the final chapter. He is not worried. He is not scrambling to fix things. He has already worked it all out. What seems like an injustice today may be the foundation of your greatest testimony tomorrow. Sometimes the hardest part of trusting God is surrendering control. You want to fix things to make them right, to force an outcome. But real trust means releasing your grip and saying, God, I don't understand, but I trust you. I don't see the way forward, but I believe you do. It's in that surrender that peace comes. But not because your situation changes instantly, but because your heart does. You realize you're not alone. The weight you've been carrying isn't yours to bear. Faith is not about having all the answers. It's about trusting the one who does. And He is faithful. He has never failed. And He won't start now. Whatever you're walking through today, whatever feels unfair, unjust, or unbearable, know this: God is with you. He is for you, and in His time, He will make all things right. Keep trusting. Keep believing. Keep holding on. The story isn't over yet. Trusting God's presence means holding on to the truth that He is with you even when you don't understand what's happening in your life. It's natural to want answers. When life feels unfair, when you're hit with unexpected pain or loss, the first question that often rises in your heart is, why? You want to know why a loved one got sick, why your hard work didn't pay off, why a door of opportunity closed, or why someone betrayed you. It feels like if you could just get an explanation, then maybe you'd be able to move forward. But God doesn't always give us the answers we want. What He does give us is something far greater, His presence. While explanations may satisfy your mind for a moment, they don't heal a broken heart. They don't bring comfort to a soul weighed down by grief, but His presence does. When you realize that God is walking with you through every valley, standing beside you in every battle, and holding you up when you feel like you can't stand on your own, that's where real peace is found. There's a reason God repeatedly tells his people throughout Scripture, I am with you. He said it to Moses when he doubted his ability to lead. He said it to Joshua when he faced a daunting task. He said it to the disciples when they were afraid. And he says it to you now. His presence is not dependent on your feelings. It's a constant, steady reality. You may not feel him near, but that doesn't mean he's not there. Trust is built when you choose to believe his promise of presence, even when your emotions are screaming otherwise. Sometimes the need for an explanation becomes a roadblock to trust. You might think if God really loved me, he'd tell me why this happened. But what if his silence is not a sign of his absence, but a call to deeper faith? God knows that understanding every detail of his plan wouldn't always bring the comfort you seek. There are some answers that, even if given, wouldn't make the pain go away. Instead, God offers himself, his comfort, his strength, his wisdom to carry you through what you can't understand. Think about a child who falls and scrapes their knee. In that moment of pain, what they want most isn't an explanation of gravity or the science behind how seeing heals. They want the embrace of a loving parent. They want to know they're not alone. That's what God does for you. He may not explain every hurt, but he will never leave your side. There's a deeper kind of trust that grows when you stop demanding answers, start leaning into his presence. It's the trust that says, God, I don't know why this is happening, but I know you're with me. It's the kind of faith that refuses to be shaken by circumstances because it's rooted not in explanations, but in relationship. The more you focus on who God is, his goodness, his faithfulness, his unchanging nature, the less you feel the need to understand every detail. When life feels unfair, it's easy to believe the lie that God has forgotten you or abandoned you. But the truth is, he's closer than ever. He's walking beside you in the fire, just like he did with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He's whispering peace to your heart in the storm, just like he did with the disciples. He's standing at your side, even when you can't see him. Real trust doesn't come from knowing why, it comes from knowing who. And when you hold on to his presence, you'll find that you don't need all the answers to have peace. You just need him. Pain is never wasted. It may not seem that way when you're in the middle of it, when life feels unfair, when your heart is broken, when nothing makes sense, but the truth is, every tear, every sleepless night, every ache in your soul has a purpose. God doesn't cause all the pain in your life, but he never lets it be pointless. He is always at work, using even the most painful moments to shape you, strengthen you, and prepare you for what's ahead. It's hard to see purpose in pain when you're still in the middle of it. When life knocks you down, the only thing you often feel is the weight of your struggle. The question that echoes in your mind is, why is this happening? But instead of giving you all the answers, just trust that there's a bigger story being written, one you may not fully understand yet. Just because you can't see the purpose now doesn't mean it's not there. Think about the process of refining gold. The metal is placed in a blazing fire and the heat is turned up until all the impurities rise to the surface. It's an intense process, but it's the only way to create something pure and valuable. In the same way, the struggles you face often reveal what's deep inside you, your fears, doubts, and insecurities. But God uses those moments not to harm you, but to refine you. He's shaping you into someone stronger, more compassionate, more faithful. Pain also has a way of drawing you closer to God. When everything is going smoothly, it's easy to rely on your own strength. But when life feels overwhelming, when you reach the end of your own abilities, you have no choice but to lean on him. It's in those moments of desperation that you experience God's presence in the most powerful way. His comfort becomes real. His peace becomes tangible. You start to realize that he's not just a distant figure. You begin to know him as a father who holds you, a friend who stays by your side, and a healer who binds up your wounds. There's also a purpose in your pain that goes beyond you. God often uses the struggles you've walked through to help others. The comfort you receive in your darkest moments becomes the same comfort you can offer someone else. Your story, no matter how painful, can be the very thing that brings hope to another person. When you tell someone, I've been there too, and God brought me through, it speaks louder than any sermon. Your scars become a testimony of God's faithfulness. Joseph's life is a powerful example of this. He went through betrayal, slavery, and imprisonment, years of pain and unfairness. But when God finally raised him up, he realized that all those painful moments were preparing him for something bigger. His suffering wasn't just about him, it was about saving his family and an entire nation. When he finally stood before his brothers, the same ones who had betrayed him, he said, what you intended for harm, God used for good. That's the promise you can hold on to too. What feels senseless now is not the end of your story. God is weaving every broken piece, every disappointment, every hardship into something meaningful. You may not see it yet, but he's working behind the scenes. Even in seasons of pain, God is building something in you. He's strengthening your faith. He's deepening your empathy. He's teaching you to rely on his timing and trust his plan. The very thing you wish would go away might be the tool he's using to prepare you for a greater purpose. So when life feels unfair and the pain seems pointless, remember that God never wastes a hurt. There's a purpose unfolding even if you can't see it yet. Comparison is a silent thief. It creeps into your heart without warning, whispering lies that what you have isn't enough, that who you are isn't enough. When life feels unfair, the pull of comparison becomes even stronger. You look around and see people who don't seem to be struggling like you are. Friends who appear to have it all together. Colleagues who succeed while you feel stuck. People who don't follow God, yet their lives seem easier than yours. And in those moments, it's easy to ask, why them and not me? But comparison is a trap. It shifts your focus from what God is doing in your life to what he's doing in someone else's. It blinds you to your own blessings because you're too busy counting someone else's. The danger of comparison is that it not only steals your joy, it also plants seeds of bitterness. You start to believe that God is holding out on you, that he's forgotten you, or worse, that he loves others more than he loves you. None of that is true. God's plan for your life is uniquely yours. He didn't create you to live someone else's story. The path he has for you is different from anyone else's because he's shaping you for a purpose only you can fulfill. What he's doing in someone else's life has nothing to do with what he wants to do in yours. When you compare, you miss the beauty of your own journey. You overlook the ways God is working in your life right now because you're too busy watching someone else's highlight reel. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that if God blesses someone else, it somehow diminishes his ability to bless you. But that's not how God works. His resources are limitless. His love is infinite. Just because someone else received a blessing doesn't mean there's less for you. God's favor isn't a pie with only so many slices, it's overflowing and abundant. What he has for you is tailor-made. Think about Peter in the Bible. After Jesus told him about his future, Peter immediately turned and asked about John's destiny. What about him, Lord? He asked. Jesus' response was clear. If I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? You must follow me. In other words, Jesus reminded Peter that his focus needed to be on his own path, not on John's. The same is true for you. God is saying, don't worry about what I'm doing in someone else's life. Keep your eyes on me and what I'm doing in yours. Gratitude is one of the most powerful weapons against comparison. When you start to feel like life is unfair, pause and take stock of the blessings you already have. It doesn't mean you ignore your pain or pretend everything is perfect. It means you shift your focus. Gratitude reminds you that even in the middle of struggle, there's so good in your life. It keeps your heart soft and your spirit open to what God is doing, even when it's hard to see. Another way to fight comparison is to genuinely celebrate others. It may not come naturally, especially when you're hurting, but choosing to rejoice in someone else's blessing opens your heart to receive your own. It shows God that you trust his timing and his plan for your life when you stop seeing other successes as a threat and start viewing them as proof of God's faithfulness. It becomes easier to believe that he's working on your behalf too. Your story is unfolding exactly as it should. You may not understand why certain doors have closed or why you're still waiting while others seem to be moving forward, but God's plan for you is right on time. The same God who created the universe, who designed every detail of your life, hasn't forgotten you. He's preparing you for something specific, something meant just for you. So when comparison tries to steal your peace, remind yourself that God's plan for you is personal. It's not a copy of someone else's journey. It's a masterpiece being crafted just for you. Trust that he's working in ways you can't see yet. Keep your eyes on him, not on the people around you. What he's doing in your life is just as important as what he's doing in theirs. Gratitude has the power to shift your entire perspective, especially when life feels unfair. It doesn't mean denying your pain or pretending everything is fine. It means choosing to see the good even when things are hard. Gratitude is not a feeling that comes naturally when you're struggling. It's a choice you make, a habit you build. It's deciding to look beyond your current circumstances and recognize the ways God is still working in your life. When life doesn't go the way you planned, it's easy to focus on what's missing, what's broken, or what's been taken away. Your mind naturally gravitates toward the pain, the loss, and the unanswered prayers. But the more you focus on what you lack, the heavier your heart becomes. Gratitude breaks that cycle. It interrupts the constant loop of negativity and reminds you of what is still present in your life. It doesn't erase the struggle, but it balances your perspective. One of the most powerful aspects of gratitude is that it shifts your focus from what you don't have to what you do have. It turns your eyes away from what's gone wrong and helps you notice the small, quiet blessings that are still there, like the people who love you, the strength you have to keep going, the beauty of a sunrise, or the moments of peace that show up unexpectedly. These may seem small, but they are evidence that God's grace is still at work in your life. Gratitude also opens the door for hope. When you thank God for what he has already done, it reminds your heart that he is still faithful. It builds your confidence that if he has come through for you before, he will do it again. It's hard to hold on to bitterness and hope at the same time. They simply can't coexist. Gratitude pushes out resentment and makes room for faith. It tells your heart, yes, things are hard right now, but God is still good. It's important to understand that gratitude doesn't mean ignoring your pain. It's not about pretending your struggles don't exist. True gratitude acknowledges the hurt while also recognizing the blessings. It's standing in the middle of a storm and saying, this hurts, but I'm still thankful for God's presence. It's admitting, I don't understand why this is happening, but I'm grateful for the strength to keep going. Gratitude is honest. It doesn't minimize your suffering, but it keeps it from becoming the only thing you see. Look at the story of Paul in the Bible. He faced unimaginable hardships, beatings, imprisonment, shipwrecks, and yet he constantly expressed gratitude. In one of his letters written from a prison cell, he told the church to give thanks in all circumstances. Not because the circumstances were good, but because God was still good. Paul understood that gratitude wasn't about his situation, it was about his perspective. He chose to focus on God's presence and promises, even when everything around him seemed hopeless. Another incredible effect of gratitude is that it draws you closer to God. When you intentionally thank Him, even in the midst of your pain, it deepens your relationship with Him. It shifts your prayers from being only about requests, asking God to fix, heal, and restore, to also including praise for what He's already done. It moves you from God, why is this happening? To God, thank you for never leaving me in this. That shift strengthens your faith. Gratitude also impacts the way you interact with others. When your heart is full of thankfulness, you naturally become more encouraging and compassionate. You stop comparing your life to others because you're focused on your own blessings. It's hard to be jealous of someone else's success when you're genuinely grateful for what God is doing in your own life. Gratitude softens your heart and allows you to celebrate others even when you're still waiting for your own breakthrough. One practical way to cultivate gratitude is by keeping a simple list of things you're thankful for. It doesn't have to be complicated, just a daily habit of writing down a few things, big or small, that remind you of God's goodness. Over time, this practice trains your mind to look for the good, even in the hardest seasons. It becomes a habit of noticing His hand at work in your life. Ultimately, gratitude is a choice. It's not always easy, especially when life feels unfair, but it's a powerful way to keep your heart anchored to God. When you choose to be grateful, you're not denying your pain, you're declaring that your pain doesn't have the final word. You're choosing to trust that God is still moving, still working, and still worthy of praise, even when life doesn't make sense. Surrender is one of the hardest yet most powerful things you can do when life feels unfair. It doesn't mean giving up or accepting defeat. It means choosing to trust that God is in control, even when you can't see the full picture. It's releasing your grip on the things you can't change and placing them into His hands, believing that He is working behind the scenes in ways you don't understand yet. There's something in all of us that craves control. When life feels unpredictable or painful, the natural reaction is to try to fix it, figure it out, or force an outcome. You want answers. You want to know how long the struggle will last, why it's happening, and when things will get better. But faith doesn't work like that. God rarely reveals the whole plan at once. Instead, He invites you to trust Him step by step, even when the path ahead is unclear. Surrender means acknowledging that you are not God, and that's a good thing. It's recognizing that His ways are higher than yours, that His timing is perfect even when it feels slow, and that His wisdom far surpasses your understanding. It's realizing that while you see only a small piece of the puzzle, He sees the entire masterpiece He's creating. Think about a child holding tightly to a broken toy. They don't want to let go, convinced they can fix it themselves. But the parent gently says, "Give it to me, I can fix it." That's what God says to you. He sees you clinging to your pain, your unanswered questions, and your desire for control. And He whispers, "Let me have it. Trust me with this." It's only when you loosen your grip that He can step in and do what only He can do. Surrender doesn't mean you stop praying or hoping. It means you stop striving. It's the difference between working in your own strength and resting in God's strength. When you surrender, you're saying, "God, I still want this situation to change, but I trust that your plan is better than mine." It's a shift from demanding answers to trusting His process. Look at Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. He was in deep agony, facing betrayal, suffering, and death, and yet His prayer was one of surrender. "Not my will, but yours be done." He didn't pretend He wasn't in pain. He acknowledged it. But He still chose to trust the Father's plan, even when it didn't make sense in the moment. That's the kind of surrender God calls you to, a raw, honest trust that doesn't deny the struggle but still yields to His will. Surrender also brings freedom. The more you try to control everything, the more anxious and exhausted you become. But when you release it to God, there's a peace that follows. It doesn't mean all your problems disappear. It means you're no longer carrying the weight of fixing everything on your own. You begin to rest in the truth that God is fighting battles you can't see and working behind the scenes in ways you may never fully understand. It's important to remember that surrender is not a one-time event, it's a daily choice. Every morning you have to decide to place your worries, your plans, and your struggles in God's hands again. Some days you might do it with confidence. Other days you may have to surrender the same thing over and over, fighting the urge to take it back. But each time you choose to let go, you're building a deeper trust in Him. One of the hardest parts of surrender is accepting that God's plan might look different than yours. Maybe you thought you'd be married by now, but you're still waiting. Maybe you believed a certain job was meant for you, but the door closed. Maybe you prayed for healing, but the sickness remains. Surrender means trusting that God is still good, even when His answers don't match your expectations. It's believing that He knows what's best for you, even when it hurts. There's a quiet strength that comes from surrender. It's not weak, it's courageous. It's choosing to trust when you have every reason to doubt. It's laying down your need for control and picking up the peace that comes from knowing God is in charge. And as you surrender, you begin to see His fingerprints on your life in ways you couldn't before, because now your hands are open, ready to receive what He has for you. God doesn't ask you to figure everything out. He asks you to trust Him. Surrender is not about losing, it's about gaining His peace, His presence, and His perfect plan. The more you release, the more you receive, the more you trust, the more you see Him move. And though life may still feel unfair at times, your heart will rest in the assurance that God is always working, always loving, and always leading you exactly where you need to be. So when life feels unfair and the weight of unanswered questions presses against your heart, remember this: God is still at work. Even when you can't see it, He is moving behind the scenes, weaving every trial, every tear, and every struggle into a greater purpose. Your pain is not wasted. Your story is not over. His timing is perfect. His plan is good, and His love for you is unshakable. Trust Him not just with the pieces of your life that make sense, but with the broken, confusing, and painful parts too. Let go of comparison, embrace gratitude, and choose daily surrender. It won't always be easy, but you don't have to walk this path alone. God is with you in every high and every low, and He is leading you to a future filled with hope. Hold on to faith. Keep trusting even when it hurts. And know this: the same God who holds the universe in His hands is holding you too.